Get started, and I want to welcome everyone here to our continued adult Sunday school class. We are continuing our study of the book of Genesis. We will be primarily in chapter 31 today. As I'd mentioned last week, we're doing only one chapter this week because this is one of the long chapters. It's actually about as long as some of the other two chapters generally put together. So when that happens, I try to just go down to one chapter. There is one more class before the Christmas break. There will be 2 weeks off during the break. There won't be any Sunday school during that time. Also, next week, the Children's Sunday School needs this space for their rehearsal. So next week, and only next week, we will be downstairs, back where we've been originally before. So we will be in the basement next week, and then in January, we're back in the sanctuary, just continuing on in Genesis. And next week, it'll be chapters 32 and 33 that we're doing, but that will be downstairs because the kids need this space up here. And I think this location up here has worked pretty well. So my plan is for us to continue in here because this seems to work, and it's nice that we're able to have the audio, have the microphone, and then also being able to record it for those who miss and want to get caught up. So I find this location's worked pretty well. Okay. So we are continuing in our study here, and last week we had covered chapters 29 and 30, and we saw a lot of Jacob's interactions with his uncle Laban. And in the last couple chapters, Jacob, of course, has arrived and met Laban and has ended up marrying, well, he originally planned to marry one of his daughters, and then ends up marrying a second and gets tricked into that. And of course, so he's married to both Rachel and Leah. And then Rachel and Leah get into a bit of a competition and about who can have the most kids, both themselves and then through their servants, whom they give to Jacob. And so by the end of the chapter 31, Jacob's up to 11 sons and one daughter, Dinah, that's recorded here. And or at the end of chapter 30, sorry. And then, of course, we saw as well that Jacob, after serving his 14 years for Laban's two daughters, ends up working for wages. And we talked last week about the interesting methods that Jacob used to increase the number of spotted and speckled goats and all that. So that's where we had left off. So we are in chapter 31. And so if you have your Bibles, feel free to turn to chapter 31, and I will start with the first few verses. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all this wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So when we left off last week, we saw that Jacob was becoming wealthier and wealthier. God was blessing him. Even though the wages that he had established with Laban seemed to initially be in Laban's favor, Jacob ends up with the bigger flocks, and Jacob ends up being wealthier. And we saw last week as well that Laban, he even tried to stack the deck further against Jacob by having his sons remove the spotted and speckled goats before the formal transfer took place. And so you could see that Laban's sons are jealous. It's not just Laban himself, it's Laban's sons, where they say Jacob has taken all that was our father's. So they think that they're getting ripped off. And as we see in verse 2, that Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Now, that must have been obviously getting increasingly tense. Plus, as we saw last week, when did Laban actually really regard Jacob with favor? It seemed the whole way through that Laban was outwardly nice, but certainly had no problem taking advantage of Jacob. So the relationship really must have deteriorated significantly if, comparatively speaking, if Laban is now not regarding him with favor as before, considering that he didn't really ever regard him with much favor. And then, of course, you add to it that God speaks to Jacob. And again, it doesn't say how he spoke, whether it was verbally or whether it was through a messenger, in a dream. It doesn't say. But what we do see in the text is that the Lord says to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers. So Jacob is wanting to leave, but more importantly, God is telling him to leave. And so it is time for him to do that. Let's go to verse 4. In this section, this is a longer section here. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before. But the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength. Yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see. All the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land and return to the land of your kindred. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. So Jacob, instead of making a decision unilaterally, he does something which is quite interesting when you consider the cultural context that he's in the ancient Near East. Because he's the head of the home. And it was not standard practice to have a formal consultation with your wife or your wives in this case. But he does so. He decides to consult with them. And you'll notice how he lays out his case, where he calls in Rachel and Leah. And remember, the two of them haven't really seen eye to eye in a lot of things. They are, in many senses, they're rivals. But he says to them, here's the situation. Your father does not regard me with favor as he did before. And here's the evidence. And he says, I served your father for, with all my strength, so they would have seen that Jacob's work. And yet your father cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. Now, is it literally 10 different times, or is Jacob sort of speaking a little with a bit of hyperbole? Sort of like we would say, I told you a million times, or, yeah, this has happened a dozen times. Regardless, it's multiple times. And so Jacob gives them some insight into what's been going on. And basically what Laban has been doing is that when Jacob was prospering, Laban would change the terms of the deal. He'd say, okay, initially it was going to be the stripe, now you get the spotted. Now, and then, I said this, now you're going to get that. But every single time, as Jacob explains, God has blessed Jacob. And God has overruled Laban's attempt to cheat Jacob. And no doubt, Rachel and Leah would have seen that this is true because Laban did this with their marriage to Jacob. I mean, Laban has shown this is the kind of person he is. And, he says that, Jacob explains to them that he had this dream where God spoke to him. And again, it's not clear, is this section here where he's talking about this dream, is that what's being referred to in verse 2, where the Lord said to Jacob, you are to depart. It's possible, but we don't know for certain. And but he outlines all of this to Rachel and Leah and mentions the vision of God telling him to leave. And the response in verse 14 is very important. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? You'll notice something here. They are united. They agree, which just makes it all, and we sort of know that it's one thing when people agree with you and they tend to always agree with each other. If you've got a big decision to make and you're consulting to get some advice, it doesn't really mean a whole lot if you talk to two friends who always think the same and everything, and they happen to agree. But you talk to two people who normally are at odds with each other, who normally are rivals with each other, and they agree, that's pretty good confirmation. And in this case here, both Rachel and Leah say quite bluntly, is there any portion or inheritance left for us in our father's house? And they make reference to, their father regards us as foreigners. He has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. The selling him is likely, that's in reference to how Laban had deceitfully handled their marriage. And what appears to have happened was that when Jacob paid his bridal price, because again, it was standard practice at that time, you pay a bridal price for your wife. Normally, that bridal price then gets given to the woman as a gift, and then that's used to help establish their household. But Laban, of course, hung on to it for himself. So his daughters are obviously not impressed with him. And so that's why it says, all the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. So finally, we've got harmony in the Jacob household, where there is agreement, it's time for him to go. I'll pause here for a moment. Comments or questions? Yes, in verse 11, we've talked about this before, if it's a good thing to reference here again, there's differences among scholars about where it talks about the angel of God said to me, is this like a physical representation of God himself? A theophany is a theological term, as in Jesus himself appearing? Or is angel of God a reference to, literally referring to a messenger of God that is delivering a message? There's difference of opinion on scholars when we see this reference to the angel of God or the angel of the Lord. Personally, I tend to lean more to the side that the term angel of the Lord, angel of God, is referencing God himself or Jesus appearing in human form. I think that actually fits quite well, especially when we see that with Abraham's dealings. But regardless, whether it's God himself or whether it's an angel speaking on behalf of God, the message to Jacob remains the same. But it's a good question. Other comments or questions? Okay, we'll go on to verse 17. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. So Jacob decides to flee, but he does so deceptively. He's worried that Laban's not going to let him go willingly. He's worried that Laban is going to try to cheat him again in some way. And so he orchestrates this plan to flee. It says that Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and it references Rachel stole her father's household gods. We'll talk about that later in the chapter. That is very interesting in terms of what she does, and we'll talk about why she did it and the significance there. But I'll hold off on that for just a moment. But verse 20, Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean. The literal Hebrew stole the heart of, which is a euphemism for deceived or tricked. And so Jacob is, it seems like the whole household, there's just this trickery going on. I mean, Jacob and Laban just sort of back and forth in terms of how this goes. Going to verse 22. When it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsmen with him and pursued him for 7 days, and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." So Laban finds out that Jacob has fled, and he decides to pursue Jacob. Not surprising that he chooses to do that. And God intervenes and appears to Laban in a dream. And this is the only direct reference that we see to God speaking to Laban, which is kind of interesting. And the statement to Laban is, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. What's with that? Like, why phrase it that way? Why not just simply say, don't hurt Jacob? Why not just say that? But instead, it's don't say anything to him. Now, we know from later on that he doesn't literally not say a word. But I think what the purpose of the message here is that God knows Laban's heart. God knows that Laban is one deceitful trickster. And so the warning to Laban is, I know what you're up to. Don't even think of it. Don't try it. Don't say anything good or bad, because God is fully aware that something that looks good on the surface can still be an underhanded scheme. We all know the types where they're so deceitful, they're so deceptive that even when they're saying something good, they're actually undermining you. Sort of the classic person that sort of, wishes you blessings and all that, and they're backstabbing you in the coffee shop. And that every time they sort of, say something to you that, okay, I wonder what they're really saying. Laban's that kind of guy. So he is warned, don't say anything to Jacob, either good or bad, just don't. Don't try anything, I think is the message that is given to Laban. Going to verse 25. And Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban, with his kinsmen, pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, what have you done, that you have tricked me and taken away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre? And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. And now you have gone away, because you longed greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out that what I have that is yours, and take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. Okay, so Laban, it says that he overtakes Jacob, he catches up to him. And I got to say, Laban is one interesting character. I'm not sure how familiar all of you are with the term gaslighting. This is textbook gaslighting. And in terms of the definition, gaslighting is where you are in the wrong, but you manage to twist your conversation with someone so you make them feel like they're in the wrong. It's kind of like, you've got the abusive husband, and he kind of goes, boy, I'm really sorry that I hit you, but it's really too bad that you said this and this and this, and you did this and you did that. And then by the end of it, you're sort of going, boy, it really was my fault. Like, this is the kind of guy that Laban seems to be. You remember last week, he does the same thing when Jacob confronts him about, why'd you trick me? Why did you give me Leah instead of Rachel? And Laban is like, well, in our culture, come on, Jacob, in our culture, obviously we have to give the older before the younger. Sort of putting it back on Jacob, like, you should have known this. And just watch how Laban does this here. What have you done that you have tricked me and driven my daughters like captives of the sword? Like, okay, so you tricked me. Not that, Laban's ever tricked him. And then driven away my daughters like captives of the sword. Like, talk about sort of just laying it on thick here. Like, it's like they're captives. Never mind, of course, that his daughters actually totally agree with the decision and said to Jacob, yeah, we need to go. Our father is like, yeah, he's... and then, why did you flee secretly and trick me and did not tell me? So again, emphasizing you did this secretly, you tricked me. This is so unfair. Because I would have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre. Like, I just wanted to put on a party for you. And you deprived me of the chance to properly celebrate your departure. I mean, Jacob, what kind of guy would do that? And you didn't even let me kiss my sons and daughters farewell. Like, this is just, like, I don't know if he was even weeping when he said this, but this is impressive stuff here. And then after all this, after dumping on Jacob, he's like, it's in my power to do you harm. I could do you harm. But your God, notice how he phrases this, the God of your fathers, not our God, the God of your fathers. Strong indication here, Laban isn't a follower of Jacob's God. The God of your fathers appeared to me in a dream and said, be careful not to say anything, good or bad. After, of course, he said all this stuff. Just letting Jacob know God appeared to me in this dream and told me, don't say anything good or bad. So obviously, everything that I've just said is consistent with what God said to me. Sure, okay. But yeah, this is something here. And then he's like, and by the way, why did you steal my gods? So again, if you need further evidence that Laban is an idolater, he worships idols. And so he's upset over the theft of his idols. In the Greek, the Hebrew word here is the teraphim. And I'll explain more on that in just a sec. Let me read the next couple verses, and then I'll give you the context. Verse 33. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the two female servants. But he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me. So he searched, but did not find the household gods. So Laban is mad that his idols have been stolen, these teraphim. And what are these idols? Teraphim, were generally these portable idols, often associated with gods of the ancestors. And usually there'd be some special feature associated with that god. And so it's possible that Rachel might have taken one of the gods that's associated with fertility. That kind of connects with the whole thing we saw last week with the whole mandrakes thing. That Rachel seems to be more than a little superstitious. And so she has taken Laban's, household gods, as the teraphim, and then she has hidden them. And Laban wants his gods back. He wants his idols back. And so he's going on a tent-by-tent search, and he ends up in Rachel's tent. And then Rachel says, let not my lord be angry. I can't rise before you, for the way of women is upon me. Now, that's sort of the literal Hebrew. If you have a more contemporary English translation, it will likely be a little more blunt. It'll say usually, this is that I'm menstruating, like this is my time of the month. So you know how you have these different euphemisms. The way of women, that is upon me, that is a reference to, she's saying, I'm menstruating right now. I'm really sorry I can't get up. And by the way, I would not be at all surprised if that was kind of included in the story deliberately, where Moses, or the original author and Moses is editing it, is having a bit of fun here, where just another reminder of how impotent these household gods are, that she says, the way of women is upon me, and she's sitting on it. Talk about how powerless these idols are. Every opportunity that the biblical authors have to remind us of how foolish it is to have other idols, they take that opportunity. And so, because that's not much of a god at all if it's able to be hidden in this way. So now, what we see here, that Laban certainly does not seem to be a follower of the true God, not a follower of Yahweh. That's why he refers to the God of your fathers, and why he's got household gods and idols. In terms of where Rachel is at, we don't know. I mean, is she a worshiper of the true God, and this is sort of an aberration? It's hard to say. It's also possible that she stole the family gods because she's upset with Laban for not giving back her bridal price. Who knows? There's any number of possibilities here. But what we do see is that Laban he is one deceitful guy here. I'll pause there for a moment. Open it up to comments and questions. Okay, I will go to verse 36. Then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods. But what have you found? What have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I've been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I've been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. So you could see that Jacob is indignant, and he responds. And it says he berated Laban. And I want to point something out here, the difference between Laban's little speech and Jacob's speech. Laban's speech is textbook gaslighting, misleading, twisting. That's what Laban does. Everything that Jacob says is completely true. Like, you just read through, and because he's correct. In verse 37, he says, you have felt through all my goods, you've searched all my stuff, you didn't find any of your stuff. Jacob doesn't know about Rachel's thing with the idol. So Jacob is, as far as he knows, is telling the truth that he has not taken any of Laban's stuff that wasn't rightfully his. And he says, I've been with you for 20 years. I haven't messed with your flocks. Your female goats have not miscarried. I've not eaten the rams of your flocks. And if there was any wild animal that captured any of the flock, it went from my side, not from your side. And then he says, look, these are my working conditions. I was outside in the heat, and I was outside in the cold. I served you for 20 years. And notice he says, 14 years for your daughters. And even here, I think this is where you see Jacob's character changing. You notice how he doesn't even bother mentioning, I wanted Rachel and you gave me Leah. No, I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters. I think Rachel and Leah have moved on to a much more equal playing field as far as Jacob is concerned. You see it in how he talks to both of them at the beginning of this chapter, and you see it here as well. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and then 6 years for wages, and you've changed my wages 10 times. You've changed my wages multiple times here. And so everything that he says is true. And so it's a striking contrast. And I think one thing that we learn from this in terms of this interaction between Laban and Jacob is that it's not wrong to stand up for yourself. When someone is taking advantage of you, you can respond. There's no requirement when someone is gaslighting you and is trying to sort of twist things and is trying to make you feel bad for doing the right thing, you have every right to call them out on it and say, no, actually, this is how it is. And, he's not putting up with it anymore. And because, I looked through this here in terms of what Jacob says, this is all true. Everything here matches. You look through Laban's, his speech here, it's not true. It's not true that he stole the daughters away by the sword. That's ridiculous. It's not true that Laban was planning a big celebration of, no way. There's no way that Laban is telling the truth there. There's an interesting phrase, by the way, that Jacob uses. It's in verse 42. He says, if the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac. It's an interesting phrase. It appears a couple times in this chapter. And I checked some commentaries here in terms of why, because usually you'd expect to see the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac, but instead we have the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac. What is this referring to? Well, one commentator suggests that the term fear is being used as a metonym. And a metonym is just a fancy way of saying a substitute word. And so it's simply the word fear is substituting for God. Sort of kind of like how we'd use the term outfit to sometimes a substitute for suit, that kind of thing. And so possibly, since Isaac treated God with reverential fear, God could be designated as the one who is feared by Isaac. So the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac. Another commentator suggests that Isaac's God just naturally induced fear in others, sort of that others who interacted with Isaac had a fear of this God. So, for example, think of the dealings between Isaac and Abimelech. And when Abimelech finds out that Rebekah is actually Isaac's wife, and Abimelech feared, what would happen to him, and feared Isaac's God. So it could be a metonym for the fear is just being used as another word for God here in the sense of reverent, in that sense, or it could be saying that that the God of Isaac induces fear in others, and that so we don't know. Frankly, those are both reasonable possibilities. Pause there for a second. Any comments or questions? Okay, so we'll carry on. So Jacob has finished his little speech and is, capped it off by saying, God saw my affliction, the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night, which that is literally what happened. I mean, God spoke to Laban and basically said, don't say anything, either good or bad. Let's go to verse 43. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these my daughters, or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. And they took stones and made a heap. And they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar-sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. Therefore he named it Gilead. And Mizpah, for he said, the Lord watch between you and me when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is a witness between you and me. So Laban's response is an interesting one, and the guy just can't help himself. He does it again. Like, he's just really good at the gaslighting here. So Jacob has just correctly rebuked him, and Laban is like, the daughters are my daughters. Okay, yeah, there are his daughters. The children are my children. Like, these are my daughters and my children. The flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. He's saying to Jacob, Jacob, all your stuff is actually my stuff. You're lucky I'm such a nice guy and I let you have any of this. That's basically how he's responding. Again, we all sort of know the kind of people who do this kind of thing, where you get in any kind of dispute with them and they immediately remind you of all they've done for you. That's a bad idea in terms of don't do that. Like, it's, if you're a parent and you're always, every time you get into an argument with your kid, you're always saying how much I've done all this for you and all that. That's a guarantee of the conversation going south. It just is. So Laban here is like everything here is mine. But then he says, what can I do this day for these my daughters or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant. So he then pivots to, okay, let's make a covenant. And what some commentators suggest, and I completely agree on this one, he's trying to save face. You know how it is where you've got a dispute between two individuals and one side knows they've lost? And so what you do is you save face. You sort of propose something that the other person's likely going to agree to, where you have an honorable way out where you can end this. Because here's what's not going to happen. There's no point in this story where we're going to have Laban say, you know what, I've been such an idiot. I'm so sorry, how I've treated you the last 20 years. Like, boy, have I ever been. He's not going to do that. And we know Laban's not going to do that. Laban knows he's not going to do it. So Laban is like, let's make a covenant. Let's put ourselves in equal footing here, even though I'm clearly in the wrong and you're in the right. I mean, God told you to leave and you left, and God told me not to intervene, and here I am intervening. So let's call it even, and let's make a covenant. And so, Laban sets the terms here. And so, as part of this covenant, they set up two separate witnesses, one by Jacob and one by his kinsman. So Jacob uses one stone to create a pillar, similar to what he did earlier at Bethel. So in chapter 28, when he built an altar, and then it says his kinsman simply meaning like his relatives, because he's not alone, he's got his relatives with him. His kinsmen pile up stones to form a heap. And so why both the stone and this heap? Probably it was intended to underline underline the seriousness of the oath. But even more likely, and what some commentaries note, is that the two witnesses reflect in some way the deities that are worshipped by Jacob and Laban. So remember, Jacob is a follower of the God of Abraham and Isaac. And of course, the God of Abraham and Isaac is a one God, monotheism, one God and one God only. So Jacob sets up a single stone, one God. Laban arranges for a heap of stones, multiple gods. And so Jacob's monotheistic faith is set in contrast or alongside the polytheism of Laban. And since ancient Near Eastern treaties normally involved the gods as witnesses, this treaty between Jacob and Laban would have required divine witnesses. And so, because Jacob is not willing to compromise his monotheistic faith, they have the two witnesses. So you have the stone representing Jacob's one God, and you have the heap of stones representing the multiple gods that Laban would have worshipped. Now, it says here, let me just go down to verse 47 here, where it references the heap here, that Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, Jacob called it Gilead. Most of your Bibles have little footnotes here, and they are referenced, they're in different languages. For Laban, let me just make sure I'm reading this correctly. For Laban, he's using Aramaic, which means the heap of witness, and Jacob is using Hebrew. So indicating that different primary languages that Jacob and Laban have. And now you'll notice here, once they've set these witnesses up, and we go to verse 49, where Laban is saying, "The Lord watch between you and me when we're out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives beside my daughters, God is a witness." This is classic Laban. He just can't help himself. Jacob, boy, if you try anything, my goodness, if you take any wives other than my daughters. Now, why is it that Jacob has more than one wife in the first place? That's right. That's because Laban set it up that way by giving him Leah initially rather than Rachel. But of course, Laban is like, Jacob, I'm worried you might try to take extra wives, so you watch out. He just can't help himself. This is just what he does. This is the kind of guy that Laban is. And even when he says, God is witness between you and me. Like, God is watching you, Jacob. That you better watch out. Going on to verse 51. Then Laban said to Jacob, "See this heap and the pillar, which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac, and Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country, and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. So Laban continues talking, and he references the two witnesses. He mentions the heap, and he mentions the pillar or the stone, and he says, like, it's a witness, and the pillar is a witness. We're not going to cross this to do each other harm. And notice what he does here. This is Laban speaking. He says, "The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." he's identifying the God of Abraham with the God of Nahor, referencing the God of their father, suggesting that this God is a pagan Mesopotamian God. Nahor isn't a follower of the true God. Abraham was. Abraham was called out. We know from other passages in the Bible that Abraham's father was an idol worshiper. That's what Abraham was called out of. And so Laban here, even now, he's making sure to insert his belief, that he's got a different way of understanding God than Jacob does. You notice Jacob doesn't compromise this. Notice how Jacob responds. It says Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Now, is it a metonym for the God of his father Isaac? Or we talked about this one before. But he references specifically Isaac here. Jacob is making sure to exclude any ambiguity. Jacob is not compromising with polytheism. Laban seems to be all in on that at every count here. I mean, Laban is just your tricky kind of guy who just knows how to just continually make you doubt and make you sort of wonder and make you sort of go, well, you have the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor. Well, wait a second. Abraham and Nahor didn't have the same God. But that's the kind of thing that Laban does. Verse 55, then we'll open it up to some discussion. Early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. Seems okay here initially. So Laban arrives, he kisses his grandchildren, his daughters, and he blesses them. Is there anyone that he left out of giving the farewell kiss to? You'll notice. No mention of it, no goodbye to Jacob. He's done with Jacob. So, because we know that when he first meets Jacob, it says he kissed him. Like this is a greeting in that culture. And it's also a way of saying farewell. And so Laban does so with his grandkids and with Rachel and Leah. With Jacob, probably, well, there's no indication of anything here. Sort of don't let the door hit you on the way out kind of thing. And of course, that's it for any interaction between Jacob and Laban. Pause there for a moment. Comments and questions.
This interaction between Laban and Jacob, almost, especially the chunk before, kind of reminds me of the story of Jesus and his temptation, his interaction after his 40 days in the desert. And that, obviously, Jacob didn't have the scriptures to rely on, but
Yep.
he takes these twisted words, and each time he kind of, you can see his response in 42, it's kind of like, if everything you're saying is true, everything that happened for the last 6 years or 20 years would not have happened.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, every step along the way, this is where we see, and this sort of builds on what we were talking about last week, this question of, is Jacob's character changing? And I made the case that yes, it is. Yes, it is. And that, and I think you see it quite clearly in this chapter, because there is no indication of anything in this chapter that Jacob does wrong. Jacob leaves with God under God's command. And everything that he says to Laban has the ring of it is absolutely true. And Laban is doing his best to confuse Jacob, to make him doubt, to make him question. And I got to say, some people are really good at that. We all know the types, like the gaslighting types where they may... I'll make sure not to give any hint of any names here. But in my role in school, because I'm vice principal now, I deal with a lot more discipline issues than I did when I was just classroom teaching. And I got to tell you, there are some students, especially some high school students, they are masters at gaslighting, where you call them in and they're completely in the wrong, and they manage to spin this tale in such a way that they always make themselves look good. I can literally have a kid in my office, and it's black. This kid is the one who's, they were bullying, they hit the other kid, they said this. I've got them dead to rights, I've got camera footage of it, and they come up with some explanation where, if I'm not careful, they could wiggle out of it. And when you're interacting, you just have to hold them accountable. You stick strictly to the facts, and you don't let them wiggle out. But yes, this is the sinful nature is real. Like it really is true. It is real. And Laban here is just a master at it. And yes, it does actually, I think it reminds me of, where Satan is trying to tempt Jesus, and in each occasion, Satan is saying something where there is some truth in it, but of course, it's intended to lead Jesus astray, and of course, Jesus doesn't go for it at any point. And at one point, Satan even tries to use Scripture, and Jesus responds, with Scripture, saying, actually, you're completely misusing the Scriptures here, so get thee behind me, see you later. And, but yeah, let me just say here, just a couple points of application. I think it's fairly obvious with some of the application I'm getting here, so I'll share it with you, and then I'll open up to some comments and questions. We have a little extra time today, and so feel free to, if there's some more things you want to ask about, you can certainly do that. So I actually left a little more time. So first point of application that stands out to me, this one's going to be super obvious. Watch out for people who try to gaslight you, like seriously. Like watch out. Don't go for it. Don't fall for it. And sometimes the best way to deal with that is to flee, to walk away. Don't interact with them. Jacob leaves. Jacob is told by God to leave, he leaves. Like this isn't a healthy relationship. Your interactions with Laban, get out of there. And so sometimes that's what we got to do. Sometimes there's a toxic person in your life, and they'll just keep on with their toxicity. Well, then leave. Like, don't interact with them. You're actually not obligated to respond to every text message you ever get, for example. You don't. Like, let the other person stew. You don't actually have to provide them with a response every time. Second thing, in terms of dealing with people who are trying to gaslight you, is sometimes you just need to call them out directly in front of witnesses, which is what Jacob also does here, where he doesn't let Laban get away with this this crazy story of, my goodness, Jacob, you're such a bad guy. You stole my daughters away, and I was just going to put a big party for you. I just wanted to, do something nice, and then you made it. You did all this, and then Jacob's like, yeah, actually, no. You've messed with my wages all this time. You deceived me. You've tricked me, and even now, you're trying to undermine me. So yeah. So watch out for people who try to gaslight you. Don't let them. Whether it means you need to flee, or whether it means whether you need to confront them. And if necessary, do it in front of witnesses. Jacob's got the benefit of all these witnesses here, which I think was a good idea. And a second point of application is that we need to remember that our loyalty to God is not to be shared with anything else. That would include, in this time, it would certainly include idols. So Jacob is, again, this is the clear sign that Jacob's character is really maturing here, where he's like, no, I'm not sharing God with other idols. I'm not going to let Laban sort of refer to the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor and let him get away with that. I'm going to refer to the God of Isaac. And when we're setting up these two witnesses, I'm going to make sure that one of these witnesses represents one God, and I'm not interested in his polytheism. And if he wants his own witness, fine. Go ahead and set up your heap. I'll have my pillar, my stone, and I'm not compromising. And so now today, we don't really have the wooden idol problem. Most people aren't really worshiping wooden idols because it's generally recognized that's foolish, but we have other idols. And so whether that's money or power or prestige or whatever, our loyalty to God is not to be shared with other idols. And I think Jacob, in this chapter, actually shows us a little bit about how to respond to that. So, got a few minutes left. Other comments or questions? Yes, he's 20 years older than when he came, and he is, in fact, there is an answer. I'm trying to remember. This time I didn't remember to bring one of my commentaries with me. I'm just doing the math in my head. So Isaac was about 130 or so when the blessing got stolen, I believe. Okay, so Jacob would have been, I'm going by memory here, I think he's like 75, 80, which, remember, lifespans are longer than now. But I think by this point he is in late middle age. So he's older. Right. Yes. Yeah. But he's already at least in his 40s or 50s when he's fleeing, because again, how old was Isaac? Okay, so how old was Isaac when Jacob and Esau were born? I know it tells us. Yeah.
Esau was 40 in chapter 26.
Yes. Yeah, so which I guess would have made Jacob 40 at that time, since they're twins, when he took the wives. But it doesn't say how much, but then there's time that goes by, because in chapter 27 it says when Isaac was old and all that, so we know there's some time that goes by. All right, I know there's an answer on this. I don't have that off the top of my head, but from what I recall from reading is that Jacob is definitely quite mature at this point in terms of age. So, but yeah, fair enough question. Other comments or questions? That is the only time that is referenced, but Rachel doesn't live that long after this either. So, because she dies when she has her second son, Benjamin. And that is in the following, let's see here, it's coming up. So, it's in chapter 35. So, no, that is the only reference to the gods here. So again, we don't have much info here. My theory, I can't say there's 100% certainty. I believe that Rachel was a believer in the true God, but she still also seems kind of superstitious. That whole mandrakes thing, the previous incident, sort of points to that. If one of these gods had something to do with fertility, and I could see that. So, yeah. It wouldn't be the first time or the last time where a believer in the true God tries to hold on to at least one idol from something else. This is not a new problem. It's obviously been the case for a long time.
Some commentators reference other ancient texts where owning the household gods means that you can make claim to
Yep.
inheritance.
Yes.
And so this may also have been Rachel's.
Claiming that inheritance, yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. There are, in that culture, if you have the household gods, that sort of gives you inheritance rights. And so that does fit with Rachel's sort of comment about that he has stolen our inheritance. And so, it's my inheritance, so I'll just take these because it's mine anyway. So, yeah, absolutely. That is a reasonable explanation. Yeah, maybe she's just hitting where these household gods are just really important to Laban, which again tells us a little bit about Laban, and helps explain a lot of stuff. So,
What about Mitzvah? Mitzvah is mentioned in 1 Samuel 7 as well, right?
watch post, yeah.
Maybe not the same town, but like in 1 Samuel, Samuel also puts up
Yep.
stone, right?
Yes, Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen. Is it the same? Yeah, that's actually, that's a good point. The question is just, in 1 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12, it references Samuel taking a stone and setting it between Mizpah and Shen. Could this be the same location? Possibly. I don't know. I'd have to, yeah. Yes? Oh, does it have a reference there? Which verse is that? Just so I can. Yeah. 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 Now it doesn't say. I mean, that's right. We'll talk about that in a couple weeks. But yes, it doesn't specifically reference to. Is he talking about Rachel here? Are there other? Because he's got a whole household. Clearly, he knows that there's foreign gods in their presence, and it is possible that by this time he has become aware of Rachel having those. But, it doesn't explicitly say, but that's interesting. Okay, well, we're just about at 12. Any last comments or questions? Okay, so I'll wrap up. I'll close with prayer in just a second. So, yeah, next week we are downstairs. Just remember on that, and chapters 32 and 33. And that will be the last of these lessons before the Christmas break. We will have 2 weeks off, so no Sunday school during the 2 weeks. And then back in January, we will then, at that point, we'd be at chapter 34 and 35, I believe. And we will continue on through Genesis. As far as how long it'll take to go through, my plan is it will finish this sort of school year or whatever. And yeah, but I'm not sure exactly when it will be. So we've still got a ways to go. There's 50 chapters in Genesis, so it's going to be a bit yet. Okay, I'll close with prayer, and then we're dismissed. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you that we can once again study your word. And Lord, we learn a lot from this chapter. We see how your servant Jacob interacted with Laban. And Lord, I just ask that you would give us wisdom and discernment. We interact with all sorts of people, and there are people that we interact with that sometimes aren't good for us, that they are trying to deceive us and mislead us. And just give us wisdom, that we can see how Jacob interacted with Laban, that we would be wise and discerning in how we deal with those who would seek to lead us astray. I just ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.